Whoa, live again. Here we go. I hope you can all hear me. Anne, can you just put a little chat there if you can see me? Comments will appear here, I'm noticing. This is my second live Facebook, and we've had a wonderful hour and about a half at the Adelaide University, the home of at least 60 Friends of Science in Medicine, and we were lucky to hear from Associate Professor Helen Marshall tonight, who's also Deputy Director of the University of Adelaide, and we learned all about a very detailed PowerPoint, many slides, but about the proven safety and efficacy of giving flu vaccinations to pregnant women and also whooping cough. Well, I've got to say there was one gaping hole in the presentation, and you guessed it, she's a Friends of Science in Medicine, so we all know what they're like, apart from getting big grants from the National Health and Medical Research Council, which they're very good at, and sitting on committees and ruling on natural therapies' lack of science. The other good thing they're about is totally cherry-picking the use of Cochrane Collaboration Review, and tonight was no exception. This was another classic night of lack of Cochrane collaboration being used, not a shred of Cochrane anywhere, and of course you wouldn't want to spoil a good story with the facts, would you? With the peak global evidence, not if you're the Deputy Director of the University of Adelaide, and you're wanting to educate the public. Not those vulnerable pregnant women, but the public well-informed. You'd want to give them every piece of peak evidence from the global authority, wouldn't you? The one you use to stitch up natural practitioners, Chinese medicine, chiropractic, anything you can get your hands on. If you can find a Cochrane to stitch up a natural therapist, Friends of Science in Medicine will be all over you like a rash. But the one thing they've never in my life ever commented about is a Cochrane collaboration review about any orthodox treatment by any member of the medical community. They will not talk to you about the Cochrane. And tonight, the Cochrane about the influenza vaccination for pregnant women. I did ask a question at the end, and we got another little fob off. I did have a little chat to Associate Professor Marshall after the seminar and said, look, you're going to have to be spruiking a little bit better the Cochranes. You can't just ignore Cochrane all the time. It's naughty, might result in some actions. So here's the Cochrane. It's a 2014 Cochrane, which you'll find if you do www.cochrane, COCHRANE.org, O-R-G, and you type in vaccines for preventing influenza in healthy adults. No, that was a little bit too hard for our friend Associate Professor Marshall. I'll just read out, the Cochrane said that they reviewed this influenza area for vaccination, and they retrieved 23 reports after looking at 116 different trials. There were 23 condensed down which looked at the effectiveness and safety of the vaccines administration in pregnant women, 23 reports, about 1.6 million mother and child couples, okay? So it's a big number, but interestingly, the overall effectiveness was regarded, this is against influenza-like illness, was regarded as limited by Cochrane. In fact, the overall efficacy of inactivated vaccines in preventing confirmed influenza has a number needed to vaccinate. Those of you very good at statistics, it's a long time since I did economic statistics at Monash Uni, probably 1974 and 1975. I think I did 2 years actually. Well, I've forgotten a fair whack of it, but it's all coming back. So the number needed to vaccinate was 70. What was the figure I said here? 71. So one person. Whoa, we've got some major hail happening here in Adelaide tonight. Whoa. Can you hear me? Unbelievable. The other comment that Cochrane said, now this is the key, there were no randomised control trials assessing vaccination in pregnant women were found. None. Zero. So we do hear a lot about randomised control trials, but unfortunately not if we actually want to vaccinate pregnant women. We don't need them at all. Not at the University of Adelaide. You can just go with your cohort studies or anything you like, case studies. Go for it. I mean, you don't need your randomised control trials here. And the only evidence available comes from observational studies where you observe with modest methodological quality. So modest quality observational studies we're talking about, according to Cochrane. And on this basis, vaccination still showed only very limited effects. This is very ordinary science, I can tell you. The other comment it made was that vaccination had a modest effect on people's time off work, although I suppose if you're pregnant, you probably have knocked off a bit early anyway. It had no effect whatsoever, the vaccinations, on hospital administrations or complication rates. Nothing at all. It did say that inactivated vaccines cause local harms and no evidence of association with serious adverse effects. But let's go back to the fact that we didn't have randomised trials here. These are just observations from people that work for drug companies running trials. Let me tell you. The conclusion then about bias in the Cochrane was an overall risk of bias in the trials they included was unclear. Cochrane could not even assess how biased these trials were because it was not possible to assess the real impact of bias. So we're talking about not toilet paper, but we're talking about studies that we can't even tell whether we should take them into account for lack of bias. And we're talking about many, many more vaccines were put up on the slideshow. Pregnant women, it's not just going to be the pertussis and also the flu vaccine. There's a lot they want to put in you. There's a lot coming. So it's pretty scary, really. The final conclusion in the Cochrane was influenza vaccines have a very modest effect in influenza, reducing influenza symptoms, including in pregnant women. So what do we conclude about a night like this? It just is another nail in the coffin for the Friends of Science in Medicine. We've done a list in the last couple of days that's totaling, we're probably close to $100 million, maybe more, in grants that they're getting from National Health and Research Medical Council. They're doing studies that are perhaps not rigorous enough. They're quoting the Friends of Science in Medicine studies that are not taking into account Cochrane collaboration. There's a number of avenues of problem here. The number one avenue is it's false and misleading information. That's pretty serious. Now, we're talking about misleading pregnant women by not telling the peak evidence. That's very serious. That could result in complaints to AHPRA, professional misconduct by whoever is condoning this. And that includes the University of Adelaide and their board, who may well be medical practitioners. That obviously includes Associate Professor Marshall. It also could be a breach of the ACCC legislation. False and misleading statements are included in that. It could well form the basis for a whole look at the Friends of Science in Medicine on whether their engagement is actually biased, whether it's in social media or whether it's in conferencing. It could be the whole association of doctors is in breach of the Medical Code of Conduct, which if you want to have a close look at it under the AHPRA website, AHPRA, Google that, and Google Medical Code of Conduct, you'll see a section on social media, and they are not allowed to be biased in their comments. Well, I can't imagine how you could be more biased than not mentioning Cochrane collaboration ever when it comes to one of their brethren, but always mentioning it when it becomes a natural therapist. So that could mean the whole association is in breach. All of those doctors are in breach of the very modus operandi of the Friends of Science in Medicine. It could also mean that they have a big problem by reference to the AVN action through the HCCC, that's the Healthcare Complaints Commission in New South Wales, which ruled that the Australian Vaccination Network had to change their name because they were misleading the public with their name. Well, Friends of Science in Medicine, if you're not going to quote Cochrane at public events, I gave you letters about 3 days ago. I got a lot of questions, right? I'm afraid there's a big chance that they may have to change their name one day. So we're off to Sydney on Thursday, and I hope Friday to actually see the HCCC. I've been talking to them on the phone, and I hope to get some answers on whether we can fine-tune not only how practitioners in New South Wales should be coping with the mandatory code of conduct for unregistered practitioners, and forming a clear guideline to you as to how that complaint form that you need to be making patients aware of, how that could actually be drafted in a way that makes a lot of sense for you in your practice. So it's not just a negative, we can turn it into a positive, and we can perhaps ask about this problem with the Friends of Science in Medicine and the fact that they're very biased in what they say, both publicly in conferences and obviously on social media, where they do quite like to have a go, don't they? It's some of you out there. And they don't hold back. They're very, very good at vernacular and very well organised. So that's all I've got for you tonight. Tomorrow I hope to see the Adelaide-based regulatory authority to discuss how they're regulating natural practitioners with their mandatory code, slightly different to Victoria, slightly different to New South Wales. The overall theme's similar, but I do want to put a face to who's regulating you in Adelaide and catch up with some more practitioners tomorrow night. And then, as I said, head to Sydney Thursday and spend Friday with some of those bureaucrats that are regulating you in New South Wales. So I'll be around on the Friday night. Any practitioners in New South Wales want to catch up, either lunch on Friday or dinner, there's opportunities for me to catch up with you then. And then back to Melbourne on Saturday, and then next week is going to be big. We've got the NHMRC having their reform sessions, you might recall, starting in Canberra on the 20th. So they'll be having strategy sessions in each state. So I hope to get to some of those states. I can't get to all of them, but probably 3 or 4 for the rest of July. So let me know if you've got any queries on what I've said tonight, either by phone or email or on the chat line. And we'll talk to you live again soon. Thank you very much. Hope you're having a good night. Bye.